So next, Courtney Young is going to present to us a presentation called StairMaster Optional Everyday Leadership. Courtney is the 2013-2014 ALA President-elect. Since 2010, she's been the head librarian and associate professor of women's studies at Penn State Greater Allegheny and has held positions at Penn State Beaver and University Park. And in 2010, she was named a Library Journal Mover and Shaker. She presents and publishes on issues related to academic librarianship, diversity, virtual reference, and professional development. So please help me welcome Courtney.
Good afternoon. Oh, I've got the after lunch crowd. All right. Let me try that one more time for my instruction librarian days. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. All right. Thank you. It's really great to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me to participate. I've already learned a lot. One of the things I've learned is that even though we didn't coordinate per se on exactly what we were going to talk about, there are a number of times where I thought, I think I'm going to say that. I think I'm going to mention that. So this is good, and I'm really excited about it. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. In a Harvard Business Review blog post that's titled, "How to Lead When You're Not in Charge," the authors assert that, and I quote, "Too many leadership experts still fail to distinguish between the practice of leadership and the exercise of bureaucratic power." They go on to explain that one must assume to have no power in order to participate in a conversation about leadership. And you are a leader if you get people to do things if they don't see you as being in charge in order to meet any goals or accomplishments. So if you're a leader, that means that people don't see you as a leader and they get things done, that somehow is leadership. I'm just working from the Harvard blog post. And I'm sure that there are people who are sitting here in the room who would take issue with that whole notion of bureaucratic power as being the only way that you get people to do the things that they want to do. But I suppose that leaves the idea of who is in charge kind of up for debate. You know, who really is in charge? And as was mentioned earlier, everybody has a boss. So you're really only in charge up until a point that your bosses remind you that they're the ones who are in charge. At first, this blog post could really be interpreted that those who are in charge will simply in a way, have things that they can do that others don't. Even if some days it feels like your bosses are, in the way, and some days it feels that way, but those roles are there for a reason. What I really think could be said about this is that if you happen to have a certain position within your organization, there is some privilege, some control, fewer barriers, and greater resources. And those things are at your disposal unless for those who are not in charge. Even given this reality, all are needed to assume leadership roles in the organization, no matter how you do that, or no matter where you are within the organization. It really is possible for you to lead. But as they say, your mileage really may vary. I've only become comfortable with the notion that I'm a leader for the past, I'd say 5 or 6 years. The term has been used to describe me, and I have to admit that when people would say to me, Courtney, you have a lot of leadership qualities. You're going to be a leader, or you're going to run something. You're going to be in charge. That I would say, that's nice, whatever. But I think to myself, these are really some misguided people. I don't know where they're coming up with this idea. But I have come to see that people were correct when they would say to me, one day you're going to be an ALA president. And I would just laugh hysterically. Like, what are you talking about? Where do you get this idea? And a few of those people are actually here in this room. But I embraced the idea and realized that actually, I did have some leadership skills. And I admit that looking back, there certainly were some signs. When I was an undergraduate, all 4 years I worked in the college library. I worked in the circulation department. And in that role, I shelved books, and then I got moved up to working at our desk. I held process course reserves, and then also did the coordination of that. One of the summers, because I lived in the place, because my mother was a member of the faculty at the college I went to, I was there all 4 years, the whole time, even during summers. And for summer work, I wanted to continue to work. So I came up with this idea that I pitched to my boss, who was a really nice lady, but she really didn't do a lot in terms of having real structure, training programs, that sort of thing. She hired, people liked working for her because she was nice, and there weren't really consequences for things. But I was a very sort of focused, serious-minded person, probably because my mother was a member of the faculty, and I had to really make sure people would know that this is Mary Young's kid, so I had to make sure that I was, on point. But I came up with the idea that, we needed to have some sort of training systems in place. So I pitched to her that, what if I wrote training manual for our circulation desk, for our shelving, and for our tracing manual? And this is back when our print collections were of a different kind of importance than they are now, because I'm not going to say they're not important. But when things would go missing, someone had to go looking for them. So we did tracing. So I came up with this idea, a plan. I pitched it to her. And she said, sure. I talked to people to get a sense of how they did their work, what would make sense, put it all together, wrote it up, and then she started using it as a training manual. And then I went to library school because it seemed like the logical thing to do, and I worked full-time in a staff position, and I took some of those elements and said, hey, this is what I was doing as an undergraduate. We should implement some of these things. So I brought that stuff with me. But then when I completed my library degree and went into my first position, suddenly all that stuff sort of fell away. The whole leadership piece, like, no, don't want to be in charge, just want to do basic reference librarian stuff. No, I'm good. And I don't know why. It didn't really make a lot of sense to me. Or thinking about it in preparation for this, sort of, why did I suddenly not take those leadership roles or shy away from them when clearly I had demonstrated some of those things? And this really, what I did, fits that Harvard Business Review definition to a T. I had no power. I didn't think people saw me as a leader. I had no bureaucratic control. But I said, hey, we need to do this. And I was able to do it. But when I got to that point where I wasn't, I didn't really sure what happened. A part of it, I think, had to do with being new within an organization and not having a real sense of what I could do or what I couldn't do, what was appropriate, how things were done. And so I must have seen my library degree at that point somehow as that exercise of bureaucratic power, and it just didn't make a whole lot of sense that I would do anything related to leadership in that way. Now, the Harvard Business Review take on leadership might have you thinking, well, that's all well and good, but what about library leadership? How can that apply to academic libraries? Does it even apply at all? Stephen Bell's Leading from the Library column from Library Journal considered just this topic. His piece titled, "There's No Such Thing as Library Leadership," considered whether or not the concept of library leadership was redundant, if it was erroneous, or if the term really truly exists. He concludes, and I quote, "Conversations about leadership with librarians requires the ability to put leadership theory and practice into context." So while library leadership may not exist as a thing that you could point to, per se, Bell feels, quote, "It's clear that those learning to be leaders in libraries need an approach that successfully blends leadership principles with on-the-ground examples of library leaders who apply these principles. One can't help but wonder, where do these examples come from? Do they need to just be from the profession? Can they come from your library? Or can they come from a different unit or college, department, or program at your university or college? Are these examples diverse? What role does mentoring play? And we've addressed a number of those things already. We discussed a number of them today and probably will continue to later on this afternoon. Now, I want to discuss some of the realities and barriers with regards to library leadership, particularly as they affect frontline librarians. Now, there are a number of library leadership programs out there. I've identified a number of them that are, for example, come from the state level, but I know, for example, at Penn State, we now have a leadership program with those cohorts of 3. So that whole piece earlier about 3 being a magic number for doing that made sense. Of course, ALA has the Emerging Leaders, and they had a Leadership Institute last summer. So library leadership, of course, is incredibly important to us here in the profession. But there are some other pieces that are related to leadership in libraries that I think we also need to think about as opportunities as well as barriers. Quick show of hands. How many people here see themselves as being a library leader? Okay. How many people feel that they're a library leader because of the role or position that they have in their organization? All right, so some different folks, but not always the same overlap, and more people actually saw themselves as leaders than what their job descriptions would dictate. In talking about leadership, we often talk about this in a very hierarchical manner. So, an upward climb, making your way towards something. Often it's ladders to leadership is highlighted. Some days it feels like it's a step ladder. Sometimes it feels like it's a step stool. Or it can be sort of a StairMaster. And the reason I picked StairMaster is for some folks, they think StairMasters are really great. If you've ever traveled and been at a hotel and gone into the gym or the exercise room, they often have a treadmill and they have a StairMaster and they might have some other piece of equipment. And the StairMaster is often one of those very popular machines because it's a good source of cardio. You're climbing a lot of stairs without having to maybe go up and down a bunch of stairs, and people are really enthusiastic about it. Or you might be like me, who's a little less enthusiastic about why would I want to climb a bunch of stairs that lead to nowhere, and I can make it go faster, and I can up the tension on it. I mean, why? To me, that just doesn't sound like fun. It doesn't sound useful. But obviously, StairMasters are useful. You do develop skills where you get to that point where you say, I need this to go faster, or I need more resistance so that I can get better. I've gotten used to it. And so that climbing piece, I think, can be useful in thinking about it in terms of this kind of equipment. But it's also, to me, in that notion of an exercise of bureaucratic power, this, to me, looks like an exercise of bureaucratic power. A more concrete representation of this, I think, is the library's organization chart. It provides you with a real lay of the land, as it were. Sometimes it dictates that organizational culture that we talked about. And it really provides a concrete way for all of us, I think in terms of a representation of the walls that exist and the limitations in terms of what you can do within your organization. At the same time, it does provide us with some order, a sense of how things get done, who's supposed to do what, because we probably wouldn't accomplish a lot as libraries if we didn't have some sense of organization. The fluidity which people can move from one spot to another is probably more so up for debate, but you do need a starting point when it comes to the structure. It also gives you an opportunity to have a sense of who to recognize for certain things, or probably in other people's minds, the person with whom to blame for certain things not working well. And that blame usually goes upward as opposed to downward. Elliot Shore, in his talk earlier, referred to the notion of monocultures. And this is sort of that homogeneous piece that we get. And we think about, well, what do our library leaders look like? Who are our library leaders? Do we have an image or a picture of them in our mind? How stereotypical is that image? If we obviously had a large number of people raise their hands to say that they were library leaders, if I was blindfolded and someone said to me, 63 people raised their hand, what might be the phrases or the terms that I would use to describe them? Would I describe myself when I talk about a library leader? There might be a number of people who wouldn't describe someone who is like me to be a library leader. But I'm glad that I'm a part of that description at this point. So this really is speaking to the whole notion of diversity when it comes to leadership, which is a really important thing for us to continue to look at, because it's not like it's new. It's not like in academic libraries we haven't been thinking about this. It takes a lot of work to recruit a diverse workforce, and it takes even more work to retain one. And we have a number of pieces in place that help us in terms of recruitment. ALA, for example, has the Spectrum Scholarship. A number of state associations also have an equivalent diversity scholarship to recruit folks who are from the diverse candidate pools. And we really want to work also to, in addition to retention, but really positioning and promoting people who don't just look like everyone who we're used to seeing in certain roles, and giving them an opportunity to compete and be in these roles. It takes a lot of work. It takes a real concerted effort, and it's going to take us a lot more time than I think we would like to get there. In addition, ARL's diversity leadership programs within academic libraries in particular are really doing a lot of work to do this. I had the opportunity to co-present with Mark Puente at the Taiga Forum in November, and talking with him, we really noted the fact that within those diversity programs with students, that 44% of those students from diverse populations end up going into academic libraries. So I think that academic libraries are doing a lot in terms of the recruitment and a starting place, but then the moving up piece is a little more challenging. We know that a lack of diversity is an issue in academic libraries. The dialogue continues, and it hopefully at some point we'll get that theory into practice, but moving to that point can be really difficult. When leadership opportunities do come up, do you think about those who would be different or bring a different perspective and recommending that they apply for those positions? Do you encourage them to apply for those positions? We heard earlier that it's really important to have those different voices and to not just to pull in everyone who's always going to nod their head yes to participate. It could be chairing a committee. It could be serving as a department head. It could be serving on a college or university committee. But there are different ways that you really can be committed to providing access to leadership for the folks who are different from you within your organization. It was really a long time before I had colleagues who had actual bureaucratic power, to continue the phrase, to provide me with an opportunity within my own institution to move up a little bit. But until that point, I would see people getting opportunities, and I would ask, so-and-so got appointed to such and such committee, or another person, got the opportunity to chair a committee. I'd be interested in doing that. I'd like to do that. And I said, okay, we're happy to know that you want to do that. We understand that, okay. But the opportunities weren't coming, and I didn't have a real strong sense of why, but I would think that I should have that opportunity. And as I said, I did start to get some opportunities, but the way that I pursued it and the way that I demonstrated that I could do it was a little bit different. Cross-campus relationships are, I think, a really great way to really foster that retention, just in general, but also in terms of leadership. Because to be quite honest, there weren't a lot of people within my library organization who looked like me, who shared certain things in common with me. But in other parts of the organization, other collegiate faculty in other departments, people working in other programs who were in leadership roles, there were folks who, in a number of ways, reflected me as a person. And getting the opportunity to connect with them was good from a mentoring standpoint, but it was also good for an organizational standpoint as well. And so something to think about is you're really sort of committed to not just developing leadership, but also retention of diversity. Look throughout your organization, because there are people there who I think can really assist you with doing that. And I'm sure that we all come from organizations where diversity is a really important component. This is also a place where organizational culture really makes a difference. And I'm sorry, I meant to say professional organizations make a difference. And that's the path that I and a number of other people used. There are, at Penn State, it's a tenure and promotion organization, so librarians earn tenure. And I earned tenure and then thought, okay, well, what else can I do? What more can I do? And I did get an opportunity from a campus director of academic affairs to do academic advising and work with our honors program, which was great. But I was also thinking about, well, what needs to be the next step in my library career? And then the service that I did with the American Library Association really provided me with those opportunities to develop the skills that we sort of highlighted throughout the day in order to contribute to my organization. I got to work with groups. You've been a volunteer organization, managed to get people who were not being paid to do certain work to actually accomplish things. That was very important to me. I was viewed as a leader. People were coming to me and asking me how to get things accomplished, which, as I said, would surprise me, but I appreciated the opportunity and that people recognized that I had something to contribute. After those opportunities, including serving on the ALA Executive Board, a librarian retired, and I was approached about considering applying for the position. I thought, well, I think I probably could do that. And during the interview process, talked about the things that I had done in my professional organization life that would contribute to that position. And that's where I am right now. And mentoring had a lot to do with that, the mentoring that I got within working in professional associations. It really provided me with a chance to talk and listen with others in the types of positions that I was interested in, as well as people who were in positions that were similar to mine, to really get a sense of what I could do that would be more dynamic and creative in terms of the work that I was doing, as well as the skills that I needed to develop in order to move up as a leader. And that sort of moves me into sort of these internal versus external, or internal and external concepts. Does it matter where you get your leadership opportunities? Does it need to be within your organization? If you haven't been on certain committees or chaired certain task forces or had a role as a liaison with particular departments, does that mean that you can't move up in your organization? Are there other paths that you can take in order to develop your leadership skills and move into positions that people view as being leadership positions? Obviously, you start at the institutional level. That local level piece is really important. In terms of how we identify it, first we start with sort of that organizational chart, obviously, and job title can do this. If it's as a director, maybe at the assistant, associate, or dean level, maybe you're coordinating a program, maybe you hold an endowed position. Job function or responsibility, as a director or a head or coordinator, or maybe even a specialist. If you do have a project or an initiative that you're the lead on, that then sort of can be viewed as leadership within the organization. And, as I said before, chairing committees as well. Leadership also means being connected to the right people and knowing sort of key partners on campus as well. And some would argue that as librarians, isn't everything that we do leadership? We provide course-related instruction. We develop the collections that allow departments to develop new programs and bring new services. On my campus, they've just been approved to offer an administration of justice degree. It's part of that process. They always check to see, can the library provide the resources and services that students earning that degree would need? And we provide a real leadership role in that way. We make sure faculty have the resources that they need for tenure and promotion. We work in terms of securing grants. We help with those new programs and initiatives. We serve on committees to provide, develop library programs and services. These are really important in terms of leadership, just those everyday things we do. Some people will say, well, that's my job, that's what I get paid for. But we bring something more to it just as librarians, and that's leadership. And it can be viewed by your organization as leadership. Of course, then there's the regional, state, national, international levels, where maybe you're serving on a committee that you've either been appointed to or elected to. Maybe a task force or a working group as well that you've been asked to join, or an elected position as being on a board, co-chairing or chairing a particular committee or section, or maybe being elected to a position within the organization. Participating in library associations, like I said, were really the opportunity that I needed to develop my leadership skills and really develop as a professional. Particularly as a frontline person who was doing reference services and who still is very much a frontline person who still does reference services, unjams printers, all that kind of good stuff, working with students on their research projects. My opportunities for leadership were I felt very limited. There were only so many things that I could do. And so serving on those committees and in those elected positions provided me with a real chance to do some different things, move forward from that day-to-day position, and really also take risks and figure out things that I could do that I didn't know I could do. It also, demonstrates your value beyond your organization. And it's important that we develop as professionals. Professional development is of increasing importance to the work that we do. I think it's always going to be important because things are constantly changing. Change is the constant. And so we have things that we have to keep up with. We have things that we have to let go of. And within the professional associations, that's a real opportunity to get a real sense of what's going on, what is this institution doing, where can I find a partnership, what could I pilot at my institution. And it's really a chance for you to get outside of your institutional bubble, or even your academic library bubble, because some of these organizations cut across library type. And I think it's really important for us to look at what we're doing in academic libraries, but also take a glimpse and see what other types of libraries are doing, because there may be some real opportunities. There's some things that are just consistent across the profession. Everyone has problem users that they have to deal with, whether they're 9, 19, or 59. Those are things that are not discrete in terms of library type. So I think that the opportunity to have those dialogues. When I became, a manager, the first people who I thought of to help me in that role and get some advice from were people who work in public libraries, because I had developed relationships with them in general, and I said, hey, give me your take on this. And a lot of their advice really did apply to what I was doing. But all of this, of course, is only going to work if your organization values your participation in this type of work. Do you have an opportunity as a part of your review process to document these things? And in that process, do they value it? Are they going to recognize it? Is Damon going to say, I'm glad that you're participating in these committees within ALA? If he is, then you know that that's something that's valued at your organization and that it makes sense for you to do. But if he says, Courtney, that's really nice, but I really need you to focus on this, then you have a real sense of, okay. And then you make the decision, do I want to do that, knowing that I have to do these other things? Or, do I say, okay, and then see if I can accomplish something and come back, because his perspective on it may change. He may see a different value in participating, but you have to see where in the organization it fits in. And if it doesn't fit in, determine what you do with that information. Leadership really requires you to have a real understanding of your organization. When you don't understand the organization, if you don't understand that, there's an expectation that you participate on the local level or on the national level, then your opportunities for becoming a leader within that organization are going to be a little more limited. You really have to, develop that organization understanding. And I got to say that this is probably one of the hardest things to do, because someone doesn't come up to you and say, here, this is what our organization's culture looks like. This is what you need to know. Here where all the pitfalls are. Here where all the opportunities are. Has anyone in this room ever been handed something where they get that information? And I've been at Penn State since 2002. I'm in my third position in the organization. And so that's not, for some people, not a long time, because we do have an associate dean who'll be retiring this summer, and he's been there for 42 years. And I think he would say that he, in all that time, also doesn't know all those pieces. He probably has a much better sense of the organizational culture. I certainly have a better sense of it than someone maybe who's coming new into our library system, but I doubt that locked away in a room somewhere is that sheet of paper that says, gee, if I'd just known, if I had just had an understanding that I wasn't supposed to ask that question of that person on that day, because that's what it can feel like when people come up to you afterwards and say, you really shouldn't have asked Sally about that, because, that's Sally's hot button. Oh, okay. Or you're in a meeting and you say, have we ever thought about doing such and such, and really taking a lead in this area? And you say, oh yeah, we tried that. And you go, okay, not to ask that question. Or you have those meetings where you're silent and then you come back in, you leave them and you kind of go, oh, I wish I had said that. I wish I had done that. Well, that's when you need that piece of paper to say, when you have that idea, this is one of those times where you can speak up. This is one of those times you can do it. I know a lot with the collegiate faculty I work with, there are things where you can just tell they're in their seat, they're just twisting and turning, and you talk to them afterwards and they're like, I just can't say anything till after I have tenure. Once I have tenure, I can say all kinds of stuff. I'm like, well, you're here at the organization because they want you to contribute. They want you to do that. If you suddenly, there's no switch that gets flipped when you have tenure where suddenly you're like, yeah, all right, people, this is what we're going to do. This is how I felt for the past 6 years. It doesn't work that way. But, it would really be helpful, of course, to have that. Leadership, I feel, really requires you to have a willingness to be a leader, which I know sounds silly, but stick with me for a second. Blaney Bowen, who is Penn State's Vice Provost for Academic Affairs, offers a really important piece of advice at every year's tenure and promotion workshop. He tells all faculty members to just simply this: be mentorable. It's simple. Be mentorable. I've always interpreted that as be open, be willing to try something in a new way that maybe you normally wouldn't, be willing to listen, be accepting of the advice and consider it, because everyone wants you to be successful. And people hire you because you have the potential, but people don't hire you because you know everything, because there's that institutional piece, there's that change that's in place. And so to be mentorable, you really have to kind of be open and willing to roll the punches and, figure out how to apply what you bring to the organization and how those things work together. If you're not mentorable, then you probably aren't going to be successful. And I think that people who are successful and are become leaders are people who really are mentorable. But I think that the next step in Bowen's advice should also be that, when you are mentorable, you become a leader. Because then you're really open to those opportunities, and you develop an understanding of how your active engagement in the work that you're doing, in the roles that you're playing on campus, are really important. And those things really allow you to get the opportunities and access to the things that maybe you didn't understand. Suddenly you're in a meeting and it becomes crystal clear that, Jane's going to ask that question that Jane asks at every faculty meeting that we ever have. And you know that the answer is going to be this. You've gotten a key in terms of the institutional culture, that just is a part of the process. For me, for example, with an ALA council, and I know Nancy's probably going to laugh about this and some other folks, that there are certain people in ALA council who come up to speak at the microphone and they have a question that they always have to ask. They always someone has to ask the question about whatever, but I don't see intellectual freedom in this document. That's their thing. Now, for someone new, they might kind of look at it and go, what's going on? But you've gotten a sense of the culture when you see somebody get up and starting to walk and you go, oh, they're about to ask about intellectual freedom. It's just that when those things start to shift for you, then you're starting to get a sense of the organizational culture. The thing I really want you all to realize, and hopefully I've made a good plug for and makes sense, is that leadership really does happen at all levels. It does require you to have opportunities. As I said, in terms of the organizational chart, I'm still sort of at this point in the org chart. I went from here to here. My dean is up here. So I'm still, in a lot of ways, I'm not a leader within my organization at the top or close to the top. There's still a few layers between me and the dean. And I'm okay with that. But I'm also okay with the fact that in my position on campus and in libraries that I'm a leader. I was given opportunities to do this as an academic advisor, coordinating honors program. And, I took advantage of opportunities outside of the organization. And those things were incredibly important to my development as a professional in my day-to-day work, as well as within the association. And I think that we really have to work to look at what you can do and where you can do those things so that you can develop those skills and demonstrate and document how they are contributing to your role as a leader in your job. As academic librarians, I really feel that we are leaders on our campus. As I said, we're developing collections. We're connecting with students in ways that others simply are not. We're stewards and working towards things, particularly, for example, with open access and digital content. We're at the forefront of that, and we're leading those charges on our campuses. We're continually developing new ways to deliver services. And as a leader, you're constantly immersing yourself in new things. The students and staff on our campuses, they see us as leaders. They come to us with questions about things. When NEH changed the way that data needed to be handled, libraries were right there to say, here, this is a process that will work. And we put that together, we educated our faculty. That's leadership right there in a nutshell. If a faculty member on campus who came to me, she's new, she wants to get involved in professional organizations, she's in the Department of Communications, and she came to me and she says, you're really active in your library organization stuff, and I need to start going to conferences and doing things. What do I do? Can you help me do that? Now, I don't know anything about communication conferences, but I do know a little bit about being involved in an organization. And because she saw me as being active in that role, she thought I was a good person to ask. I mean, they're coming to us as librarians to ask us these questions. And she came back afterwards and said, wow, I had such a great time. You were so right. I could go up and I could talk to someone after their presentation. She had no idea. She was like, I took business cards. I had really good conversations. They look to us for leadership. And we're obligated, I think, to serve in that role. I'd say embrace being an everyday leader. I'm proud of being an everyday leader on my campus, working with students, working with the faculty. It provides us with some wonderful challenges, but some really amazing opportunities. And so hopefully, when I ask this question here in a second, and I ask everyone in the room whether or not they're a leader, hopefully everyone's hand will go up. So who in this room is a leader? That's a better number, not all of them, but thank you.
Hi, my name...
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh. Well, can you hear me anyway?
I can hear you, and I can
Okay.
repeat.
Okay. So my name's Carol Castle, and I'm from NYU.
Hi, Carol.
And, I wanted to go back to, you showed a slide of various and sundry library leadership programs.
Yes.
And then you asked us how many of us were library leaders. And I got a little bit stuck before my hand went up. And it's because I'm not a librarian. I do hang out with a lot of librarians. But I come from IT. And I manage, for the most part, a bunch of software developers. So I started to think, does that make me a library leader? Or I guess my question to you is, do you think that there's some kind of special sauce that makes that sort of transforms you from a leader to a library leader? Or is it that you're a leader first and you happen to be working in a library?
That's a great question. And I think if I could answer it, I'd be making more money than I do. No. And I love that you said special sauce because I like to cook. I particularly like to bake. And I think that that's a really great question. I think that the Stephen Bell piece that kind of, he talked to 3 people in the library world about this. And one of those people was Maureen Sullivan. To say, well, what makes a library leader? And I don't think any of them said, well, you need to have a master's degree in library and information science in order to do that. So you were almost sort of apologetic about, well, I'm not a librarian, I work in IT. That's awesome. That's good. That's a really good. I don't have an answer for that question. I think it's a really good question, and I think you make a valid point that. Library leaders don't necessarily need to be, as I said, they don't have to be at the top of the organization chart. They don't have to be the dean or the director. A lot of what you're doing makes the services that the frontline folks are providing, and you might actually be working as one of those frontline people. And that's what it's all about. It's about the user. It's about, obviously customer service this week has been deemed by the Chronicle of Higher Education as a bad concept, so I won't say that. And understandably so, but the fact that, the folks that we're trying to work with to provide them with those resources and services, we're looking to you in order to implement the things that we need to do. So you provide leadership in that role. So, I think next time, don't hesitate at all. Get your hand right up there, because without you doing the stuff that you do, a lot of the things that we rely on just won't happen. So I apologize for not having a good answer, but I think it's a really good question that all of us need to think about.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Gross, and again, I do quite a lot of mentoring here in the greater New York area with a number of excellent chapters of national organizations, Special Libraries Association, ACRL New York, and the Association of Jewish Libraries. One thing that I think perhaps has me concerned as a generation baby boomer is that I came of age during the 60s and in a time where people were really concerned about their civil rights and being engaged in the American scene. And it seems to me, perhaps, and I'm not sure about this, whether or not there hasn't been an awful lot of attrition over the generations as far as engagement in the social framework of what we do as people, whether we're librarians or not. But I think that people sometimes forget that as Americans, at least our founding fathers, had in mind education for all. Of course, it took a while for that to trickle down to diverse groups, but this is something we're supposed to be doing as Americans. And whether or not you're working for an institution that actively encourages development of leadership or professional development, I think we have to remember as Americans, it's our duty to worry about ourselves and being involved. And to me, if a librarian can't hold that standard, then the organism for which they're working is not going to bear the brunt of the push that they will get against, be it resources, financially, and so forth. And I just think that much needs to be done amongst ourselves to support one another, even if our institutions don't give us that okay, because it's what we're supposed to be doing in the first place.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, that you have a certain responsibility to do that, and that's why mentoring is so important. It's been incredibly important in my career. I wouldn't be here in front of you if it weren't for mentors, and I'm trying to pass that on. There's a work-study student in my library who actually wants to go into school librarianship, and I've been working with her to make sure that she has a sense of things and to connect her with people. It's incredibly important because together we're definitely much stronger than if we're not.
So Courtney, you've been focusing a lot, and I think we've been talking today a lot about what it takes for individuals, for us to step forward and be leaders.
Yes.
But I want to say a little bit about breakthrough leadership. And I want to talk about you, Courtney.
Okay.
This might embarrass you, but I think it's a really important piece of what we're talking about. So at the American Library Association conference, the last two conferences, we've been doing community conversations with our members to find out how members feel about the ALA community and what their aspirations are for it and what are the barriers and what needs to change. And last summer, I got a group of librarians in my group who came in really excited, and they talked a lot about how ALA is not a real welcoming place. It's a really hard place for new people. But because Courtney had just been elected, they felt for the first time it was an inclusive organization, and there was a chance for them to now have an opportunity to participate. And so I want to say with this just how important it is, not just for each of us individually to do this, but some people are real breakthrough leaders. And we need models of leadership. We don't just need to be leaders. So I think you're stepping forward, taking on a role that, like you have said, is not the typical ALA leader, at least for the last so many years. That you've really broken through and you've given us a chance to have particularly young people and people of color to see themselves in this opportunity. So thank you, and I think that's a really important thing for you to include in your story.
Thank you. I appreciate that.